Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masechtas Menachot daf Pei Aleph. We are going to begin on Pei Omid Beis. In the middle of the daf, we're going to begin by reminding ourselves of yesterday's conclusion, the Tani Rabbi Chia. So the Gemara says, regarding a todishness arva tumurasa, let's say you have a carbon toda, which of course the original toda requires, in addition to the carbon, 40 breads, and it got mixed up with its tamura. So we saw in yesterday's daf that a tamura does not require bread. Now, because of this, it becomes more problematic. V'meisa achas mehen. One of the two died. However, we don't know which one's which. So chaverta ein latakana. We don't have the ability to do anything in this situation with this leftover animal because heichi nevid. What should we do? Nakriv lechem bahada. So this living animal, do we bring the breads with it? No, but dilma tamurahi. If it's a tamura, then it's not supposed to have bread. On the other hand, lo nikriv lechem bahada. So maybe then in that case, in cases the tamura don't bring bread, but dilma todahi. Maybe it's a toda, and therefore, on the other hand, it does need bread. So we don't know what to do in this situation. So then the Gemara said it makes a distinction between Eli and Zu. Hechidami idi armor Eli. So if you said a lie that's on me, which means that you are accepting upon yourself achrayas. If it gets lost or stolen, you're going to replace it. So lo sagdu ma'isila behemachrina. The lechem. Apparently, you should simply be able to bring, because of the neder that you made, that you should bring another animal, and you can make the following stipulation with bread. The layman say like this. If the one which was remaining alive was a tumor which does not need bread, hatoda. So then I'm bringing this other animal as a toda, and it'll have a halachman. The breads will accompany it. However, if the animal that was alive is a toida which needs breads, so then halachma. So these will be the breads. And this extra one will just be like an extra. So why don't we do that? So Rand says, we're talking about a situation where you said harizu, which means you're specifying this particular animal, and therefore since it's this animal, so that you don't have this eitz anymore, and therefore you don't know what to do. Should you bring bread or not bring bread? That's the problem. So simin lumoda moidis oila shish shochin dedama di chalish mutar tamura b'chutz chizkia hifrish chatas acher yutar. Okay, so a pretty long mnemonic. So Omru Lamaydin Lifnei Rabbi. So they were learning this in front of Rabbi, and they said, well, okay, maybe there is an eitzah, even in the case of harizu. B'leisi lechem. So bring bread. So again, we have this animal. We don't know its status. Is it toda, which requires bread? Is it a tumor, which doesn't require bread? So bring bread. V'leiman, just say, if this animal that's alive is the toida, so halachma, here's the bread. Elo, if let's say, again, it's the tamura, so then it doesn't need bread. So what do you do with these breads? So we'll just say, lepik, right? Why don't we just say that this bread should go out to chulun? So amilhu, v'chi machnisin chulun azara. How's that possible? You're not, you shouldn't be able to do that, because you need to be able to bring the bread into the azara. And that's certainly not something which is allowed to do, right? You can't, as Rashi says, you can't bring it in. But that's what's necessary to be done to sanctify it. All right, so 1 second. So let's say instead of just bread, bring a behema as well, and bring lechem, and say the following. If the original animal is a tumor which does not need bread, so ha'toida, so this other animal that I'm bringing is the toida, and here's its bread. If the one who was alive was a toda, so halachma, so here's the breads that accompany it. And then this other animal that I have here, we'll just call it carbon shlomim. So why can't you just do that? Because you're going to minimize the amount of time to eat the shlomim. What does that mean? So Rashi says, the hashtahavi is savik shlomim. We don't know, is this animal a shlomim or not? The din shlomim din nechom l'shnei yom v'layla. We know that when it comes to a shlomim, there's more time to be able to eat it. You have 2 days and a night. However, a toida, you only have a day and a night. So if, let's say, you eat it b'teres toida, shem nishtar mimenu l'machar, there'll be maybe left over. Nimsa maybe kashal mebeis absul, right? In other words, the fact is that you have a carbon which really could have been eaten longer, but now you're minimizing it, and therefore that's the problem. So you can't make a shorter amount of time for a carbon, and you're basically causing, because of this shorter time, that you may not be able to eat it. So Omer Rabbi Velesi Behem Lechem. So okay, but again, let's try to figure this out. Let's say you bring an animal in bread, Velema, and say the following. You say like this: So again, if the animal that is still remaining is the tamura, which does not need bread, so that'll be the tamura. And now this animal it will be the taida with its bread. Now the high the kaima taidahi, if this animal is actually a taida which needs bread, so halachma, that's will be its bread. But on this other animal to have meiser the taida, let it be considered to be meiser, like leftovers of a taida, right? And we know that meiser taida, as we saw in the Mishnah, as Rashi says over here as well, you can be you're makar of it without lechem. So Malay, it almost seems like you're not thinking very straight over here. Pei alpha madalf. Says Rashi, Shuv Karman al Menashehi Moiser Zemach. This is not a lechatchila situation. So we're not going to allow you to lechatchila cause that this is what the outcome will end up happening of having Moiser Taida. So even though technically you're right, it could work, but we're not going to lechatchila encourage a person to make such a condition. Yosef Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marsa committed Rav Nachman. So he was sitting in front of Nachman. Yosef Kaimer, he said the following. So we're not done yet. Maybe Velesi behem v'lechem. Again, let's continue to our possibilities here. Bring a behema and bread. The layman say the following: Ihach de kaima tamura he. If in fact this animal is a tamura which does not require lechem, fine. So ha toida v'halachma. So the animal that I'm bringing will be the toida. And here are the breads. Now, if this animal is a taida, so halachma, so then the breads I'm bringing connected to that. To have tamura, and it'll be like a tamura. And as again we saw in the Mishnah that a tamura does not require bread. So Malay animari. So you're answering this in this way. Are boyin bekasve bekasher? Understand? Should we put 40 on his shoulders, then that's okay? In other words, in order to be able to make a tamura, this is something in which there is a punishment of malchus. So there's no way we're going to do that. It says Rashi, Hu chayv lukos arboim al shehiter kiditnan. It says the very beginning Masechtas Tamura, shim hamir mumar. It's true. It says that if you do tamura, it will work technically. However, sevikas arboim, you get malchus for that. So we're going to tell him to make this condition and then put himself in a position where he would get malchus for it? That can't be. Rabbi Eloi cholish. So Rabbi Eloi was not feeling too good. And Ol Gabe Abaya Rabbanan. So they were sitting next to him. The Yasvi Ka'amri, they were saying, Im Isel Rabbi Yochanan. It was true that of Rabbi Yochanan that said before, with regard to a machlokus, that if you are shecht the taida inside, but the breads were chutzul chayma, and there was a question, what does it mean chutzul chayma? So Rav Yochanan chutz, when the breads are chutzul chaymas hazara kadosh, that even if they're considered outside of the azara, it's kadosh, doesn't have to be in the azara. So therefore, it alleviates the problem, as we said before, of bringing something bifnim, because it can still be sanctified, these breads, even outside of the azara, as long as it's not outside the base pagi. So leisi lechem, so bring bread, and just don't bring it inside the azara, so there won't be this issue, as we said before, of bringing some chulin to the azara. Velema, and you can still say the statement we said before. Ihach de kaima taidahu. If the one that's remaining is a taida which requires bread halachma, then this is the bread. Then this will be the bread. The ilo leipa kuchulin. But if it's not, then this bread should go to chulin. So what's the problem? And again, it's not an issue of chulin ba'azara because it would be done even outside of it. Our answer is mishum deika arba lehenif hechi levid. So how could you do it? It's required out of the 40 loaves of the Toda, and so you separate there's 4 sets of 10, and you separate one of each, so there's 4 total loaves, and those 4 loaves given to the Kohen, it also requires tenufa, needs to be waved. Now, how do you wave those breads? Heichilevid. Linvai hu avroi, you do it outside still of the Azara, so if the Hashem ksiv. So Gavoy, so instead you have to bring it inside, so it's the same problem. So it alleviates the problem on one hand that the breads don't have to be in the Azara, but eventually they do need to be, some of it has to be in the Azara to do the tenufa properly. Maskif la Rav Shisha Beredu Rav Idi. Im Isa with the Chizkiah. If it's true in that which Rav Chistis that Chizkiah said, the Yomer Kidshur Bayim Mitay Shmoinim. So we had a machlokas, if you're Mekadosh 40 among the 80, and if you said that I only want it to work if it's all 80, that doesn't work. If you say 40 Mitay Shmoinim, it's a machlokas, whether or not we say carbon gadol kamachaven, and therefore it wouldn't be good, or it's lachrayas sukumachaven, and therefore it will work. So lacy behema, so technically he says it works. So bring an animal, v'lacy shmeinim bahada, and bring 80 breads. V'lema selitis ihach dekaima taida he. If this original animal that's still alive is a taida, so hanami tihavi taida v'ha shmeinim detervayu. So out of this animal I'm bringing will also be a taida, and then we'll have 40 breads for the first toda, and then another 40 breads for the other one. Which does not require lechem, so ha taida. So and this will be the taida, the other one will be a taida, v'hal lachma, and 40 of them will be breads. And what we'll do is it'll be 40 from 80, and the other 40 will be just like achrayas, and therefore that should work. Right? It says mishum dekumamai b'achila de arboim, because we're minimizing the eating of the 40. So what does that mean? It says Rashi, Gabi habalim the kohen, regarding the baal, the kohen, the inuroitza lechel, he doesn't want to eat it. Hi'im arba, he's going to eat 4. The savar shema einkan el taida achas, he'll think there's only one taida. The ein lo kohen lo echel ki'im arba mehen, he's going to eat 40. V'abalim nami chayshishin, we're also concerned about the owners of the breads themselves. Shema shteim taidais hein. Maybe they're both taidais, and therefore there's actually 80 breads in contention, which would end up equaling 72. V'chol shmoina kadosh. So all really 8 breads for the kohen or kadosh. V'nimsa oisan arba chalos avudim. Fine. So basically, this is the issue, and therefore this would not work either. Even though it sounded like an interesting eitzah, he'll be b'mayit the achila of the arboim, or as again on the side it says of the arba, of the 4 of the kohen. Okay. So Amrule Rav Ashi Rav Kahana. Im Isel Rav Yochanan Emer Hifrish Chatos Muberes. If let's say you separate a chatos which was pregnant, v'yol, then it gave birth. So Ratza ba mischaper, Ratza b'vlada mischaper. So he says an interesting shita that you can use either one for your chatas. So if that's the case, leis behema muberes, bring a pregnant animal, v'yamtin la'ad sheteled, wait till it gives birth, v'leisi shmeina b'hada, bring 80 breads with it. The layman say the following: Ihach dekaima tamori, who he, if this, not this animal that was pregnant, but the one that's still around, we don't know if it's a tamor which requires bread. So havlada taida, havlada taida he. So it's the vlad is a taida, it's the vlad of a taida, vaha shmoinim detervayu, and therefore this will be the 80 breads for both of them. The hach dekaima taida he. So again, so basically, it's saying that if it was a tamura, so the original one doesn't need bread, these 80 breads will be for the Vlad Toida. It will be he of a hush for it and its Vlad. The ihach the kaima Toidahi, which needs 40 breads. So hanami Toidahi, this will be a Toida. The hashmoinim tavayu who behind this Vlad will have a meiser de Toida. It will just be considered like extra. So why don't we just say that? It's meiser Toida. So Amalei man leimelan the Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Who's told you that Rabbi Yochanan holds the im shiru meshuyer, that if you leave it alone from its matter, it'll be left alone. Dilma im shiru enu meshuyer. So what does that mean? Says Rashi, man who told you tam the Rabbi Yochanan hasam haidam mishum the uber lav yerich imohu. How do we know? And that necessarily it's because of uber, that the uber is of the fetus is not considered to be like a guest of the mother. The imshiru uber, if there's leftover for the uber, shul hikdishu, that wasn't sanctified hikdish la'im, when the mother became sanctified, havi mishuyer, it's left over. Deloy chashiv ke vlada, it's not like a vlad. The boy lamemer to kavasi gabi toida shehi ha'im v'havlad toidus. Dilma severely hasam im shiru enu mishayir she'en yachal shayro with carbon lifnei atzmo, that you can't leave it over to carbon by itself. Let's look at question 5, which will hopefully explain that a little bit better. So question 5, hifer shchatas muberes v'yolda. So you had a pregnant animal and gave birth. So he says ratza mezem eschaper, ratza bevlad eschaper. You can bring either one as a chatas. So mehem astadim sheshveiku b'gemara b'taim the ratza bevlad eschaper. Why do we say maybe that you could use the vlad and you can achieve a kapar? What's the nafkamina lahafresh taida muberes v'yolda? So one could hold it's because uber lav yerach imahu ven vlad chatas klal. So you could maybe say because the uber is not like the side of the mother, and therefore it's not considered the category of vlad chatas. Or an adam is chaper b'shvach hektish, that a person could achieve kapara from the offshoots of hektish, v'daitu mulchatchila uber, and his intention was originally on the fetus. V'nafkamina b'toida itu'una lechem, if in fact it needs bread. Ikar miv'v'niatzmohu tuna lechem, if the uber is a karm by itself and needs bread. V'im vlad toida, we said before, if it's considered vlad toida ena tuna lechem. So the Mishnah yesterday's daf said that vlad toida does not need lechem. But the question is, it's totally, if you hold uber as lav yerachimoi, so therefore it's like a separate thing, and therefore it would need bread. So it's not so clear what the shita is. Okay. Back in the Gemara. So leisa behema. Fine, so that's it. So Amalei man leimulan the Rabbi Yochanan im shir meshuyer dilma im shir ena meshuyer. Behind the time with Rabbi Yochanan the adam mischaper b'shvach hektish. He says that a person can be mischaper b'shvach hektish. There's nothing to do with the uber lav yerach imoi. It's just that you could use and achieve kapara from the shvach. In this case, would be the vlad of hektish. Ravina ikla lidama horia. Armulei Rav Dima Bereda Rav Huna midama horia. Ravina, he said the following: V'leisi behema, bring a behema. V'leima, and say like this: Harialai, it is upon me. V'leisi behema achariti, and bring another one. V'leisi shmoini b'hadon, bring 80 breads. V'leima ihach dekaima tamurahi, that doesn't need bread. So hani tarti toidos. So these are 2 todos. V'ha shmoinim tertavayim. Here's 80 breads. V'ihach dekaima toidahi. So v'hadi amri olai nami lahavi toida. So the question is, why can't he do that? So this could have been a good answer right at the beginning, that we don't want you to end up making new nadarim. And in this situation, since you ended up, you would have to make another neder to say a lie, right, another neder upon yourself, it's better that you didn't make a neder to begin with. So then we don't want you to have to make a second neder. So the fact is, it's low efshar. We don't allow this to be done. Okay. TA 30, no. TB 3. Okay. Let's see the next Mishnah. All right, that was a little bit difficult, but we got through it. A person says, I am accepting upon myself to bring a carbon, taida. So yavihi v'lachma menachulin. So even though he mentioned the toda, which could only maybe include the carbon, not the bread, so of course he has to bring the carbon and the bread, because the bread comes typically with a carbon taida, but it must come menachulin. It has to come from his own money. It can't come from meiser money. As we continue to pay off on the base. Taida olai, if a person says a taida is on me, the carbon, so menachulin, and it should come from chulin. V'lachma min a meiser. However, I want the bread to come from meiser. So yavihi v'lachma min a chulin. The reality is the bread is the tafel compared to the carbon, and therefore, since you originally mentioned that you were going to be spending the carbon with chulin, so too the bread also has to come from chulin money. On the other hand, toda min a meiser v'lachma min a chulin yavi. If you declare that the toda should only come from meiser sheni money, and the chulin and the bread will come from chulin, so that actually will work. That the toda will come. You can use meiser sheni money. If you say hi v'lachma min a meiser yavi, then it works also. If you say that both the bread and the carbon, everything should come from meiser sheni, fine. V'yavi mechiti meiser sheni. You shouldn't actually make this offering from the actual wheat of meiser sheni, elma mais meiser sheni. But you should only use the money of meiser sheni, assuming, let's say, you redeemed it before you went to Yerushalayim, so that money you now can use for the toda, if you so stipulated. But otherwise, you should not. You should only use the money and not the wheat. Okay. So it says the Gemara. If a person says, Harayolai lachmi taida. He says on the bread of the taida. So maybe taida v'lachma. So even though he only mentioned bread, he also has to bring the carbon. So my time, because maybe yada haygavra dolechamui taida lo ikriv. A person knows that you don't just bring bread alone; you have to bring a carbon too. So the truth is, he has to bring the carbon with the bread. V'hai taida v'lachma kaimer. That's what he's referring to. Why he only mentioned bread? So milsa nakat, he only was mentioned in the last thing. But the reality is, it's not just the bread. Of course, he also doesn't bring the carbon. Tanat. So we learned in our Mishnah, if you say taida is min a meiser v'lachma min a chulin, yavi. So in that situation, yavi, and it adds the words kamash and nadar. That's fine. The taida can come from meiser sheni. Mamai. Why can this be the case that meiser sheni comes from? That the taida comes from meiser sheni, kivandi armel lachma min a chulin. Once he says the lechem comes from chulin, yavi he v'lachma min a chulin. So why would the taida be able to come from meiser? So shani hosam di kivandi armer taida min a meiser. Once he originally said taida min meiser, nasa kamer hariyalai lechem lifter taidaso shel plaini. So it's like he said, I'm taking upon myself to bring this bread to pater the taida of someone else. That if you said the taida should come from chulin money. However, lachma min a meiser, yavi hiva lachma min a chulin, everything has to come from chulin. Even the bread. So hachinami, I don't understand. Why don't we say the same thing? Nasikam hari hilai taida lifter lachmi shil plaini. So where's hachiyash? You can't compare the two. There's two opposite directions over here. Now bishlam alechem lemifter taidasi. Taida lemifter lechem miasia. Right? So again, the ikar over here is the carbon, not the not the bread. So therefore, even though you said something about the bread, it's the ikar's really on the carbon. Okay. Let's keep moving. Tashma ha'omer hariel lai toida below lechem. Person says, I want to bring a carbon toida, but I'm not bringing bread with it. For that matter, if a person says, v'zevach, I'm going to bring a carbon below nesachim. Now, nesachim accompany the carbon, and of course, the bread accompanies the taida. So, kaifanaisa, we force him, and maybe taida v'lachma, zevach nesachim. He has to bring both. Now, taima, what's the whole reason why we force him? The amar, because he said this. Of a low amar, taida low. But if he didn't say it, then we wouldn't apply this din. Where says no? Who did afagav the low amar taida, even if he didn't say anything. Once we mentioned about you saying I'm going to bring a carbon without nesachim, the low mastile nesachim below zevach, because there's no way you can have the nesachim without the carbon. So taninami taida, we mentioned also the case of the taida. So why do we say that this is the case? Nadar, let it be a neder, upischoi imohu. Why don't we say that it means if he wishes to retract, we should allow him to do so, right? So the retraction maybe this is a retraction in his statement. So Omer Chizkiah Hamani Beis Shamahi the Amri Tafos Lashon Rishon. We go after the first thing that he said, and therefore, since he originally said this statement, so Harelai Taida. So that's it. He has to bring a taida. We don't worry about the next statement. Nan. Hareini nazir min agregus min hadavela. A person says, I'm a nazir from figs, and dried figs, which of course has nothing to do with nazirus. Nazirus is wine. But he originally did say the words hareini nazir, then he said some contradictory statement. Nazir, nazir. So why does Beis Shammai say you're a nazir? Because you're tafas lashon rishon. You said harei nazir. So it's the same thing when you said a taida, and that's the main thing that we apply. Rabbi Yochanan Rafil Tema Beis Hillel. So if it's like Beis Hillel, by the case of the nazir, he says it doesn't work because you're saying doesn't hold tafas lashon rishon. So but Omer, it's talking about where he made a mistake. And he says, therefore he felt like this. If I didn't know any better, I would never have made such a neder, right? Because I wanted to include everything. So my kaifin, what does it mean we force? The kaboy haderbe. Basically, it means if he wishes to retract, we don't allow him to. That's what it is referring to. Okay, let's see one more piece. Tashma, and then we'll see a bunch of questions. Ha'amar hareilai toida below lechem zevach below nesachim. Right, so he made this declaration. V'amru lo, and they said to him, Habi toid v'lachma v'zevach nesachim. No, you have to bring the bread. You have to bring the libations. The Yomi, and he says, Il ha'isi yodei shechein. If I knew this was the case, well, he said neder, I would have never made such a neder. So then in fact we will force him that we will not allow to have to do everything, and that he will not be able to retract. But Omer alone, we say Shamar v'Shamata, that you should listen to what you're talking about. Now Bishlam Chizkiah, I can understand according to Chizkiah Nichale, so then it's good. Or Rabbi Yochanan Kasha. So, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's a problem. So if you look in Rashi, Bishlama l'chizkiah demoikim lahi k'Beis Shammai, he'll say that it's like Beis Shammai that holds tafos lashon rishon. So also over here we'll say where it's tafos lashon rishon. So kaifan also the fact, as we saw, that he makes this declaration of harlei taida, so he has to bring a taida. We don't care about what he says about below lechem. So that's because you hold tafos lashon rishon. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, says Rashi, the Maikim lahi kebeis Hillel, right? Is not tafos lashon rishon. So havadai la beis Hillel he. So apparently the statement about a taida is not like beis Hillel. The han nadar because he made a neder that he's going to bring a toida. Upaschuhu to come il ha'isi odeya, right? So the answer is like this. So Amalach Rabbi Yochanan havadai beishamahi. It definitely is beishamah. So my shomer v'yasi. So what is that we tell him to be cautious? So Rabbi shomer, be careful. Haba toida, that you should bring a toida v'shamata havolachma, and you should bring the bread as well. It doesn't matter that you said you're not going to bring bread; you still have to bring it. Rabbi Omer shomer means haba toida v'lachma. Bring the carbon toida with its bread. V'shamata means shote rugel lasois kain. You should not be accustomed to continually do this. Okay. Let's see. Okay, we'll stop there, actually. It's a good place to stop. Okay, let's see a bunch of questions. Question 6. Am I kaifin oiso? Why are we kaifin? Why are we right? Why are we kaifin? Right? Question 6. Why don't we say that he is charata, etc.? So the answer is like this. Chizki will say this is like Beis Shammai holds tafel sasan rishon, and therefore you said hari olai toida. So therefore you have to bring a toida, which includes bread. That's answer number 1. Rabbi Yochanan says it's be'omer ilu hayisi yodesh in nardrin b'lechem. Had I known you couldn't make a neder without bread, he said neder toida v'lachma. I would have never have done this. I certainly would have included bread in the equation. Okay. Question TA 30. A person says, I'm bringing lachmi toida o toda below lechem ma dinu ma tamim. So what's the din if you would make that statement? So belachmi toida, if you said that I'm just going to bring bread, so maybe toida belachma, then in that case you bring the carbon as well, the maybe yadai, right? Because a person knows, as it says over here, that let's just find this. Ha'omer hariolai lachmi toida maybe toida vilachma, right? If all you do was say the bread, you still have to bring both, because a person knows the lechem below toda lo ikriv, right? It's nothing. So obviously that can't be that he was specifically talking about bringing bread. Of course, he's including the the carbon. Uva toida below lechem. When it comes to toida without bread, pluta iamrin and tafas rishon, maybe toida, right? Vilachma, because as Beis Shammai says, right? Which, right? That's the shita Beis Shammai. The havi nader pischo imo patamaklum. Maybe he's just really mean it's a charata. He's denying the whole thing. V'im omar ilu ha'isi odeh lo ha'isi naidrin kach el kach chayev. If you would have made that statement, then in fact he would be chayev. However, otherwise he would be in fact pater completely. Okay, that's TA 30. TB 4 maybe. Hamatvis mois meiser sheni l'shlomim he'im chal. Okay, we didn't do that yet. And TC 27. Mandin umatam. Ha'omer hare olai lachmi toida. So here we go. So in the first case, if you just say lachmi toida, so TC 27, so certainly you'd have to bring both. Let's see what I wrote. Hebi toida vilechem. Hoil kulam yoidim she'in carbon belechem below carbon. Good. And then it says, Hamir Harilai Toid Belechem. I wrote, this is correct. Zetoi im Oimer Shetafos Loshen Rishon, which is Beis Shammai. Vigam Leshitas Beis Hillel. Iamrinan. Wow, this is very good. Iodea Toida Below Lechem. Should say She'ain Toida below lechem enu roitzel linder toida. I Ani roitza lindor toideim lechem. It's basically that's what it's saying over here, which is iu hayisi odeya she noidim kach or hayisi noider kach el kach, right? But otherwise, take you would be potter, right? That's the idea behind that. Okay, we'll stop here, Adkan.